I picked up the phone to ask my son, Daniel, what time his wedding would be when my daughter-in-law, Veronica, looked me right in the eye and said with an icy smile, "Oh, we got married yesterday. We only invited special people." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Special people. I, who for 3 years had paid their $1,200 rent every single month, who had bought every piece of furniture in their apartment, who had filled their refrigerator when they didn't have enough to eat. I was not a special person. I stood there in the living room of my own house, holding a phone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, watching my son avoid my gaze while Veronica settled onto the sofa I had bought for them. The pink dress I had chosen for his wedding hung uselessly in my closet, along with the new shoes and the dream of being part of the most important day in my only son's life. I had spent $200 on that dress, thinking how lovely I would look in Daniel's wedding photos in which I would never appear. For weeks, I had been planning every detail. I had set aside an extra $1,000 for their wedding gift. I had called my sister down in Florida to tell her the good news. I had cleaned my house from top to bottom because I thought maybe they would come to celebrate with me after the ceremony. All of it crumbled in a second with those 4 poisoned words. Only special people. Daniel finally looked up, his voice sounding rehearsed. "Mom, it was an intimate thing. Very small. Just the 2 of us and the witnesses." But I knew it was a lie. I'd seen the pictures on social media. I saw Veronica's parents posing proudly next to the newlyweds. I saw her brothers toasting with champagne. I saw Veronica's white dress, which I had helped pay for with the $300 I gave her for personal expenses last month. I saw everything I wasn't invited to see. A week later, exactly 7 days after that humiliation, Veronica called me with a completely different tone. She was no longer the confident woman who had excluded me from the wedding. Now she sounded desperate, almost pleading. "Helen, the rent is late. The landlord is pressuring us and says if we don't pay this week, he's going to evict us. You must have forgotten to make the transfer." Her voice trembled slightly, as if her world were falling apart. I stayed silent for a few seconds, remembering all the times I had rushed to the bank to make that transfer. All the times I had canceled my own plans to make sure they had a roof over their heads. All the times I had eaten beans and rice so I could give them money for their cravings. And now, after shutting me out of the most important moment of their lives, they had the nerve to call me as if nothing had happened. "Veronica," I said with a calmness that surprised even me, "I guess I didn't tell you. I only help special people." The silence on the other end of the line was so profound I could hear my own heart beating. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one trembling. She was. "Helen, I don't understand," she stammered. "We've always been special to you. You're like a second mother to me." Lies. All lies, wrapped in that sweet voice she only used when she needed something. The same voice she had used to ask for money for the wedding dress, for the honeymoon, for the rings I helped finance without knowing I would never see the ceremony where they would exchange them. For so many years, I had lived with this constant feeling of walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to receive a crumb of affection from my own son. I had been the perfect mother, the accommodating mother-in-law, the silent provider who never protested when they treated me as if I were invisible. But that phrase, "only special people," woke something in me that had been dormant for far too long. I mentally calculated how much money I had spent on them over these 3 years. Between rent, food, gifts, emergencies, and whims, it was over $60,000. $60,000 that I took from my pension, from my savings, from the money my late husband left for me to live comfortably in my final years. And for what? To be treated like a stranger on my own son's wedding day. That night, after hanging up the phone, I sat on my bed and cried. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of accumulated frustration, of years of humiliations swallowed in silence. I cried for all the times they made me feel like my love was a burden, that my presence was an inconvenience, that my money was the only valuable thing I had to offer. I cried for the foolish mother I had been, for the woman who had lost herself trying to be indispensable to those who considered her disposable. When I woke up the next morning, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was something deeper, colder. I got out of bed and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same tired eyes, the same wrinkles that told stories of years spent giving love without receiving it in return. But there was something different in my gaze, a hardness I didn't recognize, a determination that had been buried under years of compliance. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, just like every morning for the past 40 years. But this time, I didn't think about calling Daniel to ask how his morning was. I didn't check my phone hoping for a text from him apologizing for the humiliation. For the first time in a long time, my first concern of the day was myself. I sat at the table where I had so often planned surprises for them, where I had counted out bills for their expenses, where I had cried in silence when they treated me with indifference. Now, that table would witness something completely different. I pulled out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began to do the math. I wanted to see, in exact numbers, the size of my own stupidity. Rent, $1,200 a month for 36 months, $43,200. Groceries, approximately $400 a month, another $14,400. Birthday, Christmas, anniversary gifts, at least $5,000. Veronica's medical emergencies, $800. The loan for the car they never paid back, $2,500. The air conditioner repair for their apartment, $700. The living room furniture, $1,200. Over $67,000. That was the precise figure of my wasted generosity. All that money, pulled from my husband's life insurance, from my pension, from the savings I had scraped together penny by penny over decades of honest work. Thrown away to keep two adults comfortable who couldn't even pretend to respect me. The phone rang, and I saw Daniel's name on the screen. Normally, I would have rushed to answer, my heart pounding, hoping he would finally apologize, that he'd explain it was all a misunderstanding. But this time, I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. It finally stopped, and I kept sipping my coffee as if nothing had happened. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, it was Veronica. I let it ring too. Then a text message from Daniel arrived. "Mom, pick up the phone. We need to talk to you urgently." I deleted the message without replying. At 2 in the afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. I hadn't done that in months without a specific purpose, without an errand related to them. It was always to the bank for a transfer, the supermarket for something they needed, the pharmacy for Veronica's prescriptions. Today, I walked just because I wanted to. I passed the park where I used to take Daniel when he was a little boy. I remembered that sweet child who would hug me tight and tell me I was the best mom in the world. At what point did he become this man who treated me like an ATM with feelings? When did I start confusing love with money? When did I begin to believe I had to buy my own son's affection? At the bank, where I had made so many automatic transfers, I stopped at the door. The manager, Mr. Peterson, saw me through the glass and waved. He'd known me for years. He had processed every one of my transfers to Daniel and Veronica, had seen my account drain month after month to fill theirs. I walked in and went straight to his office. "Mr. Peterson," I said, "I need to cancel all the automatic transfers I have scheduled." He looked surprised. For 3 years, those transfers had been as regular as the sunrise. "Are you sure, Helen? Did something happen?" His concern was genuine, more genuine than any interest Daniel had shown in me in months. "What happened is that I finally opened my eyes," I replied. "I want to cancel everything, and I also want information on how to protect my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money." While Mr. Peterson processed the cancellations, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Daniel, Veronica, Daniel again. It was as if they had developed a radar to detect when their source of income was in jeopardy. I turned the phone off completely. "Helen?" Mr. Peterson said as he handed me the papers. "Pardon me for overstepping, but in all these years, I've seen you be very generous with your family. I hope they're not pressuring you to make these changes." His words touched me deeply. This man, who barely knew me beyond bank transactions, showed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own son. "They're not pressuring me, Mr. Peterson. On the contrary, I finally stopped pressuring myself." When I left the bank, I felt strangely light, as if I had left a huge weight in that office. For the first time in years, my money was completely my own. I had no financial obligations to people who saw me as a resource instead of a human being. I walked home, thinking of all the things I had stopped doing to please Daniel and Veronica. The trips I didn't take to save money for them. The friends I stopped seeing because I was always available for their emergencies. The hobbies I abandoned because every dollar I spent on myself was one less for their needs. When I got home, I found 3 cars parked in front of my door. Daniel's, Veronica's, and one I didn't recognize. I could see movement inside my house through the windows. My blood ran cold. They had keys. I had given them keys because I trusted them, because I thought one day they would take care of me as I had taken care of them. I took a deep breath before opening the door. It was time for the first real confrontation of my new life. I opened my front door to a scene I will never forget. Daniel was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands. Veronica was pacing like a caged animal, and an older man I didn't know was looking through papers on my dining room table. My papers. My personal documents. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice louder than I expected. All 3 of them looked at me as if I were the intruder in my own home. Veronica was the first to speak, her voice filled with that desperate urgency I'd already heard on the phone. "Helen, thank God you're here. We need to talk. Mr. Davies is from the law firm we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The question came out with a calm that amazed me. "What situation? I'm perfectly fine." Daniel finally lifted his head and looked at me with those eyes that were once a child's, but now only reflected financial panic. "Mom, we went to the bank, and they told us you canceled all the transfers. Mr. Peterson explained you also blocked our access to your accounts. We don't understand why you did that." Mr. Davies, a man in his 50s with a gray suit and a smile that inspired no confidence, approached me with his hand outstretched. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Fernando Davies, an attorney specializing in family law. Your children are concerned about your mental well-being and asked me to evaluate the situation." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I walked straight to my dining room table and gathered up all my documents that he had been reviewing without my permission. "These are my private papers. You have no right to look at them without my authorization." "Mom," Daniel interjected with that condescending tone he had perfected over the last few years, "we're worried about you. Your behavior has been very strange lately. First, you cut us off financially without explanation. Then you don't answer our calls. We thought maybe you need professional help." Veronica came over and tried to take my hand with that fake tenderness she reserved for when she needed something. "Helen, honey, we know you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe the loneliness is affecting you more than you think. It's normal at your age to have episodes of confusion." The word confusion rang in my head like an alarm bell. Now I understood why they'd brought the lawyer. It wasn't to help me. It was to have me declared mentally incompetent and take control of my finances. The same woman who told me only special people were invited to her wedding was now treating me like a senile old woman. "I am not confused," I said with a firmness that silenced the room. "I am more clear-headed than I have been in years. And you are all going to get out of my house right now." Mr. Davies stepped in with that professional voice lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable. Mrs. Miller, I understand you feel overwhelmed, but your children have a legal right to intervene if they believe your ability to make financial decisions is compromised. They've documented several concerning behaviors. Concerning behaviors. A harsh, almost cruel laugh escaped my throat. Like what? Deciding my money is mine? Choosing not to finance the lives of two adults who treat me like dirt? Veronica jumped as if I had slapped her. We have never treated you badly. You're part of our family. Everything you have will be ours someday anyway. We're just moving the process along. There it was, the naked, raw truth. Everything I had would be theirs someday. In their minds, I was already dead, and they were just collecting their inheritance in advance. It didn't matter if I had 30 years left or 30 days. To them, I was just a walking bank account that had become problematic. Out, I said, pointing to the door. All three of you, out of my house. Daniel stood up with the pouty expression of a child who didn't get his way. Mom, we can't just leave like this. We have responsibilities. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you co-signed for. You can't just cut us off overnight. I can't? My voice rose for the first time. Who says I can't? For 3 years, I have paid rent on an apartment that isn't even in my name. I have filled a refrigerator in a house where I am not welcome. I have financed a life that clearly has no room for me. Mr. Davies pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my table. Mrs. Miller, we've prepared some documents that could ease this transition. A power of attorney that would allow Daniel and Veronica to manage your finances more efficiently. It would be temporary, of course, just until you're feeling better. I took the folder and threw it directly into the trash without even opening it. The only transition happening here is you three walking out that door. Veronica started to cry, but they were tears of frustration, not sadness. You can't do this to us, Helen. We were counting on you. We made plans based on your support. We bought things. We made financial commitments because we knew we could count on you. Commitments based on my money, I replied. Not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my company, just on my money. And now that I've decided my money has a better use in my own life, suddenly I'm a confused old woman who needs legal supervision. Daniel tried to approach me, but I took a step back. He was no longer the little boy who used to run into my arms after a nightmare. He was a 35-year-old man who saw his mother as an obstacle between him and a comfortable, financed life. Mom, we made mistakes, he said, his voice trying to sound regretful. The wedding, it was a misunderstanding. Veronica was nervous. I was under pressure. We can fix this if you'll just be reasonable again. Reasonable. The word tasted bitter. Being reasonable means I keep paying for your life while you treat me like a stranger. It means pretending it doesn't hurt to be excluded from the most important day of my only son's life, Mr. Davies packed his papers with the efficiency of someone used to rejection. Mrs. Miller, this isn't over. Your family has legal options. If you are truly making irrational decisions due to mental health issues, a judge can determine that you need supervision. His words were a physical blow. This wasn't just a manipulative family visit. It was a real legal threat. They wanted to declare me incompetent to manage my own affairs. Mr. Davies, I said, looking him straight in the eye, I suggest you do your research before you threaten a 69-year-old woman who has managed her finances impeccably for 40 years, who raised a son alone after being widowed, who maintained a home, worked until she honorably retired, and who, until last week, was financially supporting 2 fully capable adults. Veronica stopped crying and looked at me with a coldness that finally showed her true face. This isn't over, Helen. We have rights too, and lawyers. Perfect, I replied. Hire all the lawyers you want, with your own money, of course, because mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums. The 3 of them walked to the door, their pride wounded by being told no. Before leaving, Daniel turned back one last time. Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up alone, with no one to take care of you when you really need it. Daniel, I said with a deep sadness but also crystal clarity, I'm already alone. The difference is, now it's by my own choice, not by your neglect. When the door closed behind them, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful silence I had heard in years. It was the silence of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep, but it wasn't from sadness or regret. It was from the adrenaline of having taken back control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, planning my next moves like a general preparing for battle. If Daniel and Veronica wanted a fight, I would give them a war, but it would be a war I fought with intelligence, not emotion. At 6 a.m, I was dressed and ready to go. My first stop was the office of Mr. Sullivan, a lawyer I had met years ago when I handled my husband's will. Unlike the lawyer Daniel and Veronica had brought, Mr. Sullivan had an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of senior citizens. Helen, he said after I explained the situation, what your children attempted yesterday is more common than you think. It's called elder financial abuse, and it's a federal crime. The fact that they entered your home without permission and went through your private documents is also a violation. His words were both calming and alarming. Calming because they confirmed I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was truly abusive. Alarming because I realized the situation was more serious than I had thought. We need to document everything, Mr. Sullivan continued. Every transfer, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We're also going to change your will to protect your assets from any future attempts at manipulation. We spent 3 hours reviewing my financial records. Mr. Sullivan whistled when he saw the total figure, over $67,000 in 3 years. Helen, with this money, you could have lived comfortably, traveled, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you completely financed the lives of 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding. When I left his office, I had a complete plan. First, I would change all the locks on my house. Second, I would install a security system with cameras to protect me from any more surprise visits. Third, I would open a new account at a different bank where they had no contacts. And fourth, I would start living the life I had been postponing for years. My next stop was the hardware store. The owner, Walt, had known me for years because I was always in there buying things to fix Daniel and Veronica's apartment. This time was different. Helen, what brings you in today? Another emergency at your son's place? He asked with the familiarity of someone who had been a silent witness to my wasted generosity. No, Walt. This time it's for my own house. I need to change all the locks, and I want the best quality you have. He looked surprised but didn't ask questions. While he was selecting the locks, his son Kevin, who installed security systems, came in. It was Providence in action. Kevin, I said, I also need to install security cameras. The whole system. Price is not an object. While they prepared everything for the next day's installation, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Veronica, calling from someone else's phone since I had blocked her number after yesterday's confrontation. Helen, it's Veronica. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults. Talk, I said dryly. Look, I understand you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Daniel and I have talked and we want to make it up to you. What do you think about organizing a special dinner to celebrate our marriage with you? We could do it at your house, cook together like old times. The manipulation in her words was so obvious it was almost funny. Veronica, how much exactly do you owe in rent? The silence on the other end confirmed I had hit the nail on the head. Well, it's 2 months. $2,400 in total. But that's not the only reason I'm calling. Helen, we really miss having you in our lives. Do you miss me or do you miss my money? I asked directly. Both, she answered with a surprising honesty. Helen, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, we need your financial help, but we also love you. You're important to us. If I'm so important, I said, why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to get a phone call that isn't asking for money? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? Another silence. We both knew the answer. Never. Veronica, I'm going to explain this to you one time. For 3 years, you have treated me like an ATM with feelings. You have used me, ignored me, humiliated me, and finally insulted me in the worst possible way. Now that the money is gone, you suddenly discover you love me. Helen, please. No, I interrupted. There is no please. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't special enough to be at your wedding. Now, I'm making mine. I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I didn't want any more interruptions on my day of liberation. That afternoon, I went to the beauty salon where I hadn't been in over a year. I always canceled my appointments because Daniel or Veronica needed something urgently or because the money I had set aside for myself ended up being for one of their emergencies. Helen, shouted Brenda, my favorite stylist. What a surprise. I thought you'd forgotten about us. I hadn't forgotten, Brenda. I just forgot that I deserved to be pampered too. I got the full treatment. Cut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without feeling guilty. While Brenda worked on my hair, she told me about her life, her kids, her dreams. It was refreshing to have a conversation that didn't revolve around the needs of Daniel and Veronica. You look beautiful, Helen, she said when she finished. But more than that, you look free. Did something good happen? Yes, Brenda. I finally learned to say no. When I got home that afternoon, there was a car I didn't recognize parked in front of my house. My heart sped up for a moment, thinking maybe Daniel and Veronica had returned with reinforcements. But as I got closer, I saw an older woman sitting on my front steps. Helen? She asked as I got out of the car. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? I'm Margaret Vance. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really had a chance to talk. I heard some very loud voices at your house yesterday, and I was worried. Is everything all right? Her genuine concern touched me deeply. Here was a stranger showing more interest in my well-being than my own son. Please, come in, Margaret. I'll make us some coffee, and I'll tell you a story you won't believe. As I made coffee, I told her the whole situation. Margaret listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, and when I finished my story, her eyes were filled with tears. Helen, she said, you did the right thing. I went through something similar with my daughter 5 years ago. I also thought it was my obligation to finance her adult life. I also believed that if I didn't give them money, they wouldn't love me. What happened? I cut them off when I realized they only called when they needed something. At first, it was terrible. They threatened me, emotionally blackmailed me, tried to make me feel guilty. But after 6 months, my daughter called to truly apologize. Now we have a real relationship based on love, not money. Her words gave me hope and confirmed I had made the right decision. Do you think Daniel and Veronica will ever understand? Maybe, maybe not, she answered honestly. But that's no longer your responsibility, Helen. Your responsibility now is to live your own life. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep without worrying if Daniel and Veronica had money for rent, for food, for their whims. I went to sleep thinking about myself, my plans, my future, and I slept better than I had in years. The next day, Kevin and Walt arrived at 8 a.m. to change the locks and install the security system. While they worked, my phone kept ringing from unknown numbers. Veronica was still trying to reach me from different phones, but I had developed a new skill, completely ignoring calls I didn't want to take. Helen, Kevin said as he installed the cameras, this system will give you total peace of mind. You can see who's at your door from your phone, even when you're not here. And if anyone enters without permission, an alert is automatically sent to the police. The irony didn't escape me. I was installing a security system to protect myself from my own son, but it didn't hurt like before. It was simply a practical measure to maintain my new peace. While they worked, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: call my sister Diana in Florida. We had lost touch because every time we talked, I would end up bragging about Daniel and Veronica's achievements, about how much money I had spent on them, about how proud I was to be able to help them. I realize now that our conversations had become financial reports disguised as family news. "Helen?" Diana answered, surprised. "Sis, how are you? We haven't talked in months." "I'm fine, Diana. Better than fine, actually. I'm calling to tell you I've finally come to my senses." I told her the whole story from the beginning: the secret wedding, the humiliation, the visit with the lawyer, my decision to cut off the funding. Diana listened in silence, and when I finished, her response shocked me. "Helen, sis, it's about time. Every time we talked, it broke my heart to hear you boast about how much money you'd given them, as if love is measured in dollars." I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how. "What did you want to say?" "That Daniel never spoke about you with affection when I saw him at family gatherings. It was always, 'My mom helped me with this,' or 'My mom bought me that,' but never, 'I miss my mom,' or 'I love my mom.' It was as if you were a service, not a person." Her words hurt, but it was a necessary pain, like when a doctor cleans an infected wound. It hurts, but it's part of the healing. "You know what else struck me?" Diana continued. "Veronica always spoke of you in the future tense. When Helen is gone, we'll be able to remodel her house. Or, when we inherit, we're going to invest in the business. As if they were just waiting for you to die to start really living." That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. They didn't just see me as an ATM. They saw me as a temporary obstacle between them and their money. While I was exhausting myself to make them happy, they were already planning their future without me. After hanging up with Diana, I sat in my kitchen, processing all this information. 45 years of marriage to a man who truly loved me. 35 years raising a son alone after being widowed, and 3 years financing 2 adults who saw me as a wealthy nuisance. The doorbell rang, and I saw on the new cameras that it was Margaret with a mug in her hands. I opened the door, and she offered me fresh brewed coffee. "I thought you might need some company after everything you told me yesterday," she said, with that genuine smile I was beginning to appreciate. We sat in my living room, and Margaret told me more details about her own experience. "My daughter used to say the exact same things to me. 'You're like a second mother to me. We're special to you. Someday it will all be ours anyway.' They're rehearsed lines, Helen. They learn them from the Emotional Manipulation Handbook." "Do you think such a handbook exists?" I asked, half joking. "Not officially, but it seems they all read from the same book. Chapter 1 is Make her feel indispensable. Chapter 2 is Create constant financial emergencies. Chapter 3 is If she resists, question her mental health." We laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. It was funny and tragic at the same time to recognize such predictable patterns in our own children's behavior. "Margaret, did you ever feel guilty for cutting off the money?" "Every single day for the first 3 months," she answered honestly. "But then I started to see the results. My daughter had to get a second job. Her husband stopped playing golf every weekend and started looking for extra work. They learned to live within their means. And more importantly, they learned that I was a person, not a resource." That afternoon, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years: visit my husband's grave. I always found excuses not to go because Daniel or Veronica needed something, or because the cab fare was better spent on one of their emergencies. The cemetery was quiet and beautiful. Robert's gravestone was a bit neglected because I hadn't been there to clean it in months. I sat on the grass beside his headstone and spoke to him as if he were alive. "Robert, my love, I think I got lost for a while. After you were gone, I put all my energy into Daniel. I wanted to be the best mother in the world, to somehow make up for him growing up without a father. but I think in the process, I forgot to be myself. The wind blew gently, and for a moment, I felt like he was listening. Our son has become someone I don't recognize. Or maybe he was always this way, and I just didn't want to see it. His wife is, well, you know how she is. The money you left for me to live peacefully, I spent it supporting them. But not anymore, my love. I've learned. And I cleaned his gravestone, replaced the withered flowers with fresh ones, and stayed there for another hour, just enjoying the peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry to get home to solve some crisis for Daniel and Veronica. When I got back, there were 3 cars parked in front of my house again. My heart raced, but this time, I was prepared. The cameras showed me it was Daniel, Veronica, and 2 other people I didn't recognize. They all seemed agitated, talking among themselves and pointing at my house. I didn't get out of the car. Instead, I called Mr. Sullivan, my lawyer. Mr. Sullivan, they're at my house again. This time they've brought more people. What should I do? Don't get out of the car, Helen. I'm on my way immediately. And I'm calling the police. After our conversation yesterday, I filed for a temporary restraining order. They are not allowed on your property. 15 minutes later, Mr. Sullivan and 2 police cars arrived. I saw the officers talking to Daniel and Veronica, saw my son gesticulating furiously, saw Veronica crying again. But this time, her tears didn't affect me. One of the officers approached my car. "Ma'am, you can get out now. Your visitors will be leaving." When I got out of the car, Daniel yelled at me from the street. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You can't call the police on your own son." "Daniel," I replied with a calmness that surprised me, "family doesn't threaten you with competency hearings. Family doesn't enter your house without permission. Family doesn't treat their mothers like ATMs." Veronica screamed from the other side of the street. "You're going to pay us what you owe us. We have bills you co-signed for. You can't just abandon us like this." Mr. Sullivan intervened. "Mrs. Miller, any future communication must be through my office, and I suggest you consult with an attorney before making threats, because my client has complete documentation of all the payments she has made voluntarily for 3 years." I watched them drive away, defeated, but not surrendered. I knew this wasn't over, but for the first time in this situation, I felt confident. I had professional help, emotional support from Margaret, and most importantly, mental clarity about what was right and what was wrong. That night, Margaret invited me to dinner at her house. I met her daughter, who was visiting, and I saw with my own eyes what a healthy family relationship looked like. They spoke with respect, asked genuinely about each other's lives, and laughed together. The daughter didn't ask for money once during the entire evening. "This is what I wanted with Daniel," I confessed to Margaret after her daughter left. "And maybe someday you'll have it," she replied. "But first, he has to learn that you are a person who deserves respect, not just a source of income." For the first time in weeks, I went to sleep feeling hopeful about the future. The next few days were strangely peaceful. The security cameras showed me that Daniel and Veronica would drive by my house several times a day, sometimes slowly, sometimes parking for a few minutes, but never getting out. It was as if they were studying my routine, looking for the perfect moment for their next move. Mr. Sullivan had advised me to document each of these visits, so I kept a detailed log with dates and times. "Their persistence will work in our favor," he had told me. "Every time they show up after being told to stay away, it strengthens our case for a permanent restraining order." On Friday morning, I was having a quiet breakfast when the doorbell rang. The cameras showed a well-dressed young woman with a folder in her hands and a professional smile. I didn't recognize her, but something about her posture told me this was not a social visit. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," she said when I opened the door. "I'm a social worker with Adult Protective Services. We received a report that you may be at risk, and we need to conduct a wellness check." My blood ran cold. Daniel and Veronica had escalated the situation, It wasn't just threats from private lawyers anymore. Now they had involved the government. "May I see your identification?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "Of course." She showed me an official ID that looked legitimate. "I'm Raquel Mendez. May I come in to speak with you?" I let her in because I knew refusing would look worse for my case. Raquel sat in my living room and took a form out of her folder. "Mrs. Miller, we received reports that you have had significant changes in your financial behavior, that you have cut off communication with your family, and that you have shown signs of paranoia by installing unnecessary security systems. We were also informed that you have refused medical and legal help from your loved ones." Every word had been carefully chosen to make me sound like an unstable old woman. I recognized Veronica's hand in the phrasing. She had always been skilled at manipulating words to get what she wanted. "Miss Mendez," I said with all the dignity I could muster, "I would like to call my lawyer before I answer any questions." "Ma'am, this isn't a legal interrogation. It's a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem with us talking." The phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," made me angry. It was the same logic abusers use to justify their invasions. If you're innocent, you shouldn't complain about your privacy being violated. "Ma'am, I am calling my lawyer. You can wait here, or you can come back another day, but I will not answer questions without legal representation present." I called Mr. Sullivan, and he arrived in 20 minutes. When he walked in and saw the social worker, his expression hardened. "Miss Mendez," he said after reviewing her ID, "I hope you have a court order to be here, because my client is under my legal representation, and any unauthorized evaluation constitutes harassment." "Sir," Raquel responded, with less confidence than before, "we have reports from a concerned family about the well-being of Mrs. Miller. It is our duty to investigate." "What family?" Mr. Sullivan asked dryly. "The same family that tried to make her sign over power of attorney without representation? The same family that entered her home without permission and went through her private documents? The same family that excluded her from important events while living off her money?" He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I have here complete documentation of financial and emotional abuse towards my client. $67,000 extracted from her accounts in 3 years. Systematic social exclusion and emotional blackmail. If anyone needs to be investigated here, it is not my client." Raquel reviewed the documents with growing discomfort. It was obvious that the information she had been given did not match the reality in front of her. "Mrs. Miller," she finally said to me, "can you explain why you decided to cut off financial support to your son so abruptly?" "Because I discovered they were using me," I answered simply. "Because I realized that to them, I wasn't a mother. I was a bank account. Because I got tired of financing the lives of people who saw me as a burden." "But don't you consider it your responsibility to help your family?" The question infuriated me. "Miss Mendez, my responsibility as a mother was to raise my son until he was 18, educate him, and give him the tools to be an independent adult. My son is 35 years old, married, and fully capable of supporting himself. Financing his adult life is not my responsibility. It is my choice, and I chose to stop." Mr. Sullivan interjected. "Miss Mendez, would you consider it a normal situation for a 35-year-old man to be unable to pay his own rent without help from his 69-year-old mother?" Raquel didn't answer immediately. I could see she was reconsidering the whole situation. "Mrs. Miller," she asked after a moment, "do you manage your own finances?" "Completely. I can show you my bank statements, my investments, my tax payments. Everything is up to date and in order." "You live independently?" "As you can see, I keep my house clean. I take care of myself physically, I drive my own car, and I have healthy social relationships with my neighbors." "Do you take any medication?" "Only vitamins and supplements. I have no medical conditions that require medication." Mr. Sullivan added, "My client has just undergone a complete medical evaluation as part of our legal process. She is in perfect mental and physical health." Raquel closed her folder and sighed. "Mrs. Miller, based on this conversation and the documentation I've reviewed, I see no evidence that you are at risk or in need of intervention. I will be closing this case." After she left, Mr. Sullivan and I sat in silence for a few minutes. "Helen," he finally said, "this is going to keep escalating. Daniel and Veronica will not stop until they regain access to your money. We need to prepare for their next move." That afternoon, reflecting on the social worker's visit, I realized something important. I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a woman who had taken control of her life and was willing to defend it. I called Diana, my sister, to tell her what had happened. "Helen," she said after hearing everything, "you know what impresses me most about this story? It's not how badly Daniel and Veronica behaved. It's how strong you have become." Her words touched me deeply. She was right. A month ago, a visit from a social worker would have devastated me. It would have made me doubt myself. It would have made me consider funding Daniel and Veronica again just to avoid trouble. But now, I was firm in my decisions. That night, Margaret came to visit with a bottle of wine. "Helen, I want to celebrate with you." "Celebrate what?" "That today you resisted another attack on your freedom and came out victorious. Every time you stand firm, you become stronger." We toasted to my new strength, to my new life, to the freedom I had been waiting for without even knowing it for years. "Margaret," I said as we drank our wine, "do you think I'll ever stop missing the Daniel he was as a child?" "Probably not," she answered honestly. "But you will stop allowing that nostalgia to keep you a prisoner of the Daniel he is now." Her words held a deep wisdom. I could love the boy my son had been without allowing the abusive adult he had become to continue harming me. That night, I slept soundly, knowing that every day I was becoming stronger, more independent, and freer. Daniel and Veronica could keep trying to manipulate, blackmail, or scare me, but they had already lost their power over me. My new life was just beginning. 2 weeks passed without any news from Daniel and Veronica, and I began to believe they might have accepted reality. But on a Tuesday morning, as I was watering the plants in my garden, I saw an unfamiliar car park in front of my house. An older man in a suit and a young woman with folders got out. My heart sped up, but no longer with fear, with indignation. How many more times were they going to try the same thing? The man approached my door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Helen Miller? I'm Dr. Ricardo Vega, a geriatric psychiatrist. This is my assistant, Miss Peters. Your family hired us to conduct an evaluation of your mental state." "I don't need a psychiatric evaluation," I said from my garden without getting any closer. "And you are on private property without authorization." "Ma'am," Dr. Vega insisted, "your son is very worried about you. He says you've had drastic personality changes, irrational behavior with money, and episodes of paranoia. A simple evaluation could resolve all these concerns." Ms. Peters added in a syrupy voice, "It's just a conversation, Mrs. Miller. If you're fine, as you say, the evaluation will confirm it, and your family will be at ease." I immediately recognized the tactic. It was the same one Veronica had used. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem. But I was no longer the same naive woman from a month ago. "Dr. Vega," I said with authority, "I am 69 years old and have managed my affairs independently my entire adult life. I will not submit to psychiatric evaluations because my son doesn't like that I stopped financing his life." "Ma'am, we understand your resistance," said Ms. Peters with that condescending tone people use with small children. "But the evaluation is for your own good." My own good. The laugh that came from my throat was bitter. You know what was for my own good? To stop paying the rent for 2 adults who treated me like garbage. You know what else was for my own good? Installing cameras to protect myself from family members who enter my house without permission. Just then, Mr. Sullivan pulled up in his car. Upon seeing him, Dr. Vega and Miss Peters exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Vega, Mr. Sullivan said after getting out, I hope you have a court order to be here because otherwise, you are violating the restraining order we have against my client's family. We are not family, the doctor responded defensively. We are mental health professionals hired by concerned relatives. Hired by relatives who are ordered not to approach my client, Mr. Sullivan retorted dryly. What you are doing is called harassment by proxy, and it is equally illegal. He took out his phone and called the police. Officer, I need you to come and remove 2 individuals from my client's property. They are violating a restraining order. While we waited for the police, Dr. Vega tried to justify his presence. Mrs. Miller, your son showed us concerning evidence, unpaid medical bills, stockpiled medications, erratic behavior with money. Doctor, I interrupted. My son lied to you. I have no outstanding medical bills because I'm not sick. I don't have stockpiled medications because I don't take any. And my behavior with money is perfectly rational. I stopped giving it away to people who mistreated me. But ma'am, Miss Peters insisted, your family says you threatened to disinherit them completely, that you changed your will without consulting anyone. Of course I changed my will. My voice rose for the first time in the conversation. Why would I leave my inheritance to people who exclude me from the important moments of their lives? Why would I reward abuse with money? 2 police cars arrived, and Officer Johnson, who already knew the situation from previous visits, approached Dr. Vega. Doctor, I need you to leave this property immediately. This woman has a valid order of protection. Officer, we are health professionals. We are not breaking any laws. Yes, you are, Mr. Sullivan interjected. You are here as representatives of people who are forbidden to approach my client. It is indirect harassment. Dr. Vega and Ms. Peters left, grumbling, but before getting into their car, Ms. Peters shouted, Mrs. Miller, your family just wants to help you. Don't let them isolate you from the people who love you. The people who love me don't try to declare me crazy to steal my money, I shouted back. After they left, Mr. Sullivan and I sat in my living room to plan the next step. Helen, this has gotten out of control. Daniel and Veronica are spending money they don't have to hire professionals to try and declare you incompetent. This means they are desperate. What more can they do? They can try to file for guardianship. It's expensive and hard to win. But if they get a sympathetic judge and a psychiatrist willing to testify in their favor, they could manage to have a guardian appointed. The idea terrified me. Could they take away control of my money? They could try, but we have solid evidence that you are completely sane and that they are motivated by greed, not genuine concern. That afternoon, I called Diana, my sister, to vent. Sis, she said after hearing my story, do you realize how far they are willing to go for money? They are risking family relationships, spending on lawyers and doctors, destroying their own reputation, all to regain access to your bank account. Her words made me reflect. Daniel and Veronica had revealed their true nature completely. There was no going back. There was no possibility of genuine reconciliation. To them, I had never been a respected mother or mother-in-law. I had always been just money on legs. That revelation, though painful, was also liberating. I no longer had to wonder if I was making the right decision. I no longer had to feel guilty for protecting myself. They themselves had shown that my emotional and physical well-being mattered less to them than my money. That evening, Margaret came to visit with a surprise. She had invited her friends from the gardening club to meet me. Helen, she introduced me. These are my friends, Brenda, who you already know from the salon, Maria, Carmen, and Hope. We have all been through similar situations with abusive relatives. We spent the evening sharing stories. Maria had had to set boundaries with a brother who constantly asked for money. Carmen had cut ties with a daughter who only visited when she needed something. Hope had had to change her will after discovering her grandchildren saw her as their retirement plan. What hurts the most, I confessed, is not losing the money I gave them. It's realizing I never had the love I thought I had. Helen, Hope said with the wisdom of her 80 years. True love is not bought or sold. If you had to pay for it, it was never real. Her words were like a balm to my wounded soul. She was right. I had been buying attention, not love. I had been financing an illusion. You know what I discovered? I told my new friends. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't love you is worse than the loneliness of being alone. At least now, when I'm alone, I'm in good company. We all laughed and toasted with tea to our newfound wisdom. That night, after my new friends left, I sat in my garden to think. The stars shone brighter than ever. Or maybe I was just seeing them with clearer eyes. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely financially alone. I had no dependents. I had no financial responsibilities to anyone but myself. And instead of scaring me, that reality excited me. I could travel if I wanted. I could remodel my house. I could buy nice clothes. I could donate to charities I cared about. I could invest in my own future instead of financing the present of ungrateful people. Freedom tasted like hope. And for the first time in years, I was eager to plan my future. A month after the psychiatrist's visit, I thought I had finally won the war. I had settled into a beautiful routine. I would have a quiet breakfast reading the newspaper, tend to my garden, have lunch with Margaret or one of my new friends, and in the afternoons, I dedicated myself to activities I had abandoned for years. I had taken up painting again, something I was passionate about before becoming Daniel and Veronica's personal financier. But on a Thursday morning, as I was painting some flowers on my new easel, Mr. Sullivan arrived at my house with a grim expression that froze my blood. Helen, we need to talk. Daniel and Veronica have filed a formal petition for guardianship in family court. They are asking for a legal guardian to be appointed. The words fell on me like stones. I knew it was a possibility, but hearing it out loud made it terrifyingly real. Does that mean they can take away control of my money? If a judge determines that you are not capable of managing your affairs, yes, they could appoint Daniel as your legal guardian, which would give him total control over your finances. I sat down heavily on my sofa, feeling the weight of the deepest betrayal I had ever experienced. My own son was trying to have me legally declared incompetent to steal my money. Mr. Sullivan, what evidence could they possibly have? You yourself have seen that I am perfectly sane. They have statements from 3 witnesses who claim to have seen you behaving erratically. They also submitted medical bills that they claim you haven't paid, and medications that you are supposedly stockpiling without taking. But that's a lie. I have no outstanding medical bills or stockpiled medications. I know, Helen, but they have fabricated convincing evidence. They also have the statement from Dr. Vega saying that you refused to cooperate with a psychiatric evaluation, which they interpret as evidence of mental deterioration. The manipulation was diabolical. They had turned my refusal to submit to an unnecessary exam into evidence of mental illness. They had used my instinct to protect myself against them as proof that I needed protection. Who are the 3 witnesses? Mr. Sullivan consulted his papers. Veronica, of course, a neighbor named George Herrera, and someone who claims to be your pharmacist, Mr. Chen. George Herrera was the neighbor across the street, a disagreeable man who had always had issues with me because my friends sometimes parked in front of his house. Mr. Chen was indeed my pharmacist, but I couldn't understand what he could have said against me. I need to talk to Mr. Chen, I told Mr. Sullivan. Something isn't right there. We went to the pharmacy together that same afternoon. Mr. Chen greeted me with surprise and nervousness. Mrs. Miller, nice to see you. How are you? Mr. Chen, I was told that you signed a statement saying I have erratic behavior with my medications. His face turned beet red. Mrs. Miller, Your daughter-in-law came in a few weeks ago asking about your medications. She said she was worried because you were acting strange. And what did you tell her? I explained that you barely buy vitamins and occasional aspirin, that you don't have any regular prescriptions. But she insisted that was proof you weren't taking proper care of your health. Mr. Sullivan intervened. Mr. Chen, did you sign any papers? She brought a document that said I confirmed Mrs. Miller had irregular patterns of medication purchases. I thought it was for an insurance company or something. I didn't know it was for a lawsuit. My own pharmacist had been tricked into signing something he didn't fully understand. Veronica's manipulation knew no bounds. Mr. Chen, I said, I need you to write a statement explaining exactly what happened and clarifying that I have no issues with medication. Of course, Mrs. Miller. I feel terrible about this misunderstanding. After the pharmacy, we went to confront George Herrera. When we knocked on his door, he greeted us with obvious hostility. What do you want? Mr. Herrera, Mr. Sullivan said, I understand you signed a statement about my client's behavior. So what if I did? That woman is crazy. She's been acting weird for weeks. Can you be more specific about what behaviors you've observed? Installing cameras like she lives in a war zone, having strange people visit her at all hours, yelling in the street with her family. I realized that George had interpreted everything out of context. I installed the cameras to protect myself. The strange people were my new friends. The yelling was when I defended my home from Daniel and Veronica's invasions. Mr. Herrera, I said, do you know why I installed the cameras? No, and I don't care. To protect myself from my son and daughter-in-law, who were entering my house without permission and threatening me. That's what a crazy person would say. He responded cruelly. There was no way to reason with him. His testimony was based on superficial observations interpreted with malice. That night, Mr. Sullivan and I sat down to plan our defense. Helen, we need our own psychiatric evaluation. I have a colleague, Dr. Elena Morales, who is an expert in competency evaluations. She can officially confirm that you are completely sane. And what if Daniel and Veronica have bribed the judge? What if none of this matters because they've already decided to declare me incompetent? Helen, the legal system isn't perfect, but it's not completely corrupt either. We have solid evidence of your mental competence and of their financial motivations. We are going to fight this. The next day, I went to my appointment with Dr. Morales. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind but perceptive eyes. Mrs. Miller, I am going to ask you a series of questions and give you some tests to evaluate your mental capacity. Please take your time and answer honestly. For 2 hours, she asked me questions about my memory, my reasoning skills, my financial understanding, my emotional health. She also gave me cognitive tests and asked me to solve math and logic problems. Mrs. Miller, she said at the end, your results are well above average for your age. Not only are you mentally competent, but your cognitive function is excellent. Doctor, why do you think my family is doing this? Based on what you've told me and the documents I've reviewed, this appears to be a classic case of elder financial abuse. Unfortunately, it's more common than people think. I left the appointment feeling validated but also sad. The professional confirmation of my sanity was a relief, but it also confirmed that the legal battle was real and necessary. That afternoon, Margaret organized an emergency meeting with all our friends from the gardening club. When I told them about the guardianship petition, they were all indignant. Helen, Maria said, we will testify in your favor. We have been with you for weeks, and anyone can see you are perfectly fine. Better than fine, Carmen added. You are more clear-headed and stronger than many 40-year-old women I know. Hope, with her 80 years of wisdom, took my hands. Helen, honey, what your children are doing is not new. For generations, greedy children have tried to declare their parents crazy to get their money. But you have something many of those victims didn't have. Documentation, legal support, and friends who can testify for you. Her words gave me hope. I was not alone in this battle. I had an army of strong women who had seen my transformation firsthand. You know what's the saddest part of all this? I told them. That Daniel and Veronica are willing to destroy any possibility of future reconciliation for money. Even if I were willing to forgive everything before, there's no coming back from this. And maybe that's for the best, Brenda replied. At least now you know exactly who they are and can act accordingly. That night, for the first time since this nightmare began, I truly cried. Not from sadness, but from grief. I was saying a final goodbye to the son I thought I had, to the dream of a loving family, to the illusion that unconditional love was reciprocated. But something new was also being born in me, a steely determination not to let them steal not only my money, but my dignity and my freedom. The war had officially begun, but I was ready to fight. The court date arrived 3 weeks later. I woke up early, dressed in my best black suit, and looked at myself in the mirror with a determination I had never felt before. Today, it wasn't just my mental capacity being judged. It was my dignity as a human being, my right to live free from abuse, my value beyond my bank account. Mr. Sullivan arrived at 7 in the morning to go over our strategy one last time. Helen, remember, the burden of proof is on them. They have to prove you are incompetent. We just have to show that you are not. And what if the judge is already biased against me? Judge Harrison has a reputation for being fair. I've researched his previous cases, and he doesn't automatically favor families. He cares about protecting the rights of senior citizens. We arrived at the courthouse at 9. In the hallway, I saw Daniel in a new suit he had probably bought for the occasion, and Veronica dressed in black as if she were at a funeral. Maybe she was. The funeral of our family relationship. When our eyes met, Daniel avoided my gaze, but Veronica held my stare with a coldness that confirmed for her this was just business. Their lawyer was an older, elegant man with the kind of confidence that comes from winning similar cases before. When he began his opening statement, his strategy was clear: to paint me as a confused old woman who had been manipulated by strangers to turn against her loving family. Your Honor, he said in a solemn voice, Mrs. Helen Miller has shown a clear mental deterioration in recent months. She has cut off all financial support to her family without rational explanation, installed unnecessary security systems due to paranoia, and isolated herself from her loved ones under the influence of neighbors and lawyers who are clearly taking advantage of her vulnerable condition. Every word was carefully chosen to make my empowerment sound like dementia, my freedom sound like external manipulation. Then they called their witnesses. Veronica was the first to testify, and her performance was Oscar-worthy. She cried as she described how I had completely changed, how I had become hostile and paranoid, how I had isolated myself from the family that loved me. Your Honor, she said with a broken voice, Helen was always like a second mother to me. To see her mental decline has been devastating. We just want to help her get the care she needs. Lies wrapped in convincing tears. When Mr. Sullivan cross-examined her, the cracks in her story began to show. Mrs. Miller, can you tell the court the last time you called my client for a reason other than asking for money? Veronica stammered. Well, we always talked about many things. Can you give a specific date? I don't remember exact dates. Is it true that you and your husband got married without inviting my client? It was a very small ceremony. Is it true that when my client asked about the wedding, you told her you had only invited special people? Veronica turned red. Those words were taken out of context. What would be the correct context for telling your mother-in-law she isn't a special person? She couldn't answer convincingly. Daniel was next. Seeing him on the stand, swearing to tell the truth as he prepared to lie about my mental health, was one of the most painful moments of my life. This was the boy I had raised alone, to whom I had dedicated my entire life. My mother was always very generous with us, he testified. But lately she has become erratic and irrational. We believe she is being manipulated by people who are taking advantage of her." When Mr. Sullivan cross-examined him, the mask fell off completely. "Mr. Miller, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years?" "I don't know the exact amount. Would $67,000 sound about right?" "Maybe. She was always generous." "And how many times did you visit your mother without asking her for money?" The silence was deafening. "Is it true that you and your wife entered my client's home without permission and went through her private documents?" "We were worried about her." "Is it true that you brought a lawyer to pressure her into signing over power of attorney?" "We wanted to help her manage her finances." "At 35 years old, do you need help from your 69-year-old mother to pay your rent?" Daniel couldn't answer with dignity. George Herrera testified about my supposed erratic behaviors, but when Mr. Sullivan questioned him on the details, he admitted he had never spoken to me directly and that all his information was based on superficial observations. Dr. Vega testified that my refusal to be evaluated was evidence of mental decline, but Mr. Sullivan presented the documentation from our evaluation with Dr. Morales, which completely contradicted his conclusions. Then it was our turn. Mr. Sullivan first called Mr. Chen, my pharmacist, who explained how he had been tricked into signing a statement that misrepresented my medication purchasing habits. Dr. Morales testified about my excellent mental state, presenting the results of the cognitive tests, which had been flawless. Mr. Peterson from the bank testified about my financial competence, explaining that my decisions to cancel automatic transfers had been completely rational and processed correctly. Margaret and my friends from the gardening club testified about my lucidity, my new vitality, and my ability to maintain healthy social relationships. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I stood with dignity and walked to the stand, feeling the weight of 69 years of experience, of wisdom gained through pain, of strength discovered in adversity. Mr. Sullivan guided me through my testimony, allowing me to tell my full story. The $67,000 spent in 3 years, the humiliation of being excluded from the wedding, the constant emotional manipulation, the invasion of my privacy, the legal threats. "Mrs. Miller," Mr. Sullivan finally asked, "Why did you decide to cut off financial support to your son and daughter-in-law?" "Because I finally understood that what I was receiving from them was not love," I answered, my voice clear and strong. "It was a business transaction disguised as a family relationship. My money was welcome, but I, as a person, was not." "Do you regret your decision?" "I only regret that it took me so long to make it." Daniel's lawyer tried to make me seem confused during his cross-examination, but I answered each of his questions with clarity and precision. When he tried to suggest that my new friends had manipulated me, I explained that for the first time in years, I had relationships based on mutual respect, not financial interest. In his closing arguments, Daniel's lawyer kept insisting that I was a victim of external manipulation. Mr. Sullivan was devastating in his response. "Your Honor, what we have seen here is not the case of an incompetent elderly woman, but that of a woman who finally found the strength to free herself from years of financial and emotional abuse. The plaintiffs have presented no real medical evidence of mental incompetence. What they have presented is frustration because their source of income decided to exercise her legal and moral right to protect her own resources." Judge Harrison retired to deliberate for 2 hours that felt like 2 years. When he returned, his expression was serious but clear. "After reviewing all the evidence presented," he began, "it is clear to this court that Mrs. Helen Miller is in full command of her mental faculties. Professional psychiatric evaluations confirm her cognitive competence. Her financial decisions, while they may be painful for her family, are completely rational and within her rights." My heart began to beat faster. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the evidence suggests that this petition is motivated by financial interest rather than genuine concern for Mrs. Miller's well-being. The court completely denies the petition for guardianship." I had won. I had won not only the legal battle, but my freedom, my dignity, my right to live without being abused by those who were supposed to love me. As we left the courthouse, I saw Daniel and Veronica talking furiously with their lawyer. Veronica shot me a look of pure hatred before walking away. Daniel looked at me one last time, and for a second, I saw something that might have been regret, but it was far too late. That night, Margaret hosted a celebration at my house with all our friends. We toasted to justice, to freedom, to the sisterhood of strong women who support each other. Helen, Hope told me, today you didn't just win a court case, you won your life back. She was right. For the first time in years, the future belonged completely to me. I could travel. I could love. I could create. I could live without fear, without guilt, without manipulation. 3 months later, I sold my house and moved into a beautiful apartment near the city center. I donated half of my money to organizations that protect senior citizens from family abuse. With the other half, I began to live the life I had always wanted. I traveled to Europe, took art classes, and joined volunteer groups. I never heard from Daniel and Veronica again. I heard through the grapevine that they had had to move to a smaller apartment and that Veronica had gotten a job for the first time in years. Perhaps adversity would teach them what my generosity never could: the value of honest work and independence. Some nights, when I look at the stars from my new balcony, I think about the woman I was a year ago, fearful, manipulated, believing I had to buy love. That woman is gone, and in her place was born someone who understood a fundamental truth. True love never has a price, and freedom is never too expensive. My name is Helen. I am 70 years old, and I have finally learned that the most important person I have to love and protect is myself.
My son yelled at me for being late to pick up his kid. I was bleeding from a car accident. I shut him up. It wasn't the bleeding knee or the frozen air that hurt most. It was my son's voice when I walked in the door. That morning had started just like any other. I brewed my usual cup of chamomile tea and wrapped Ethan's scarf in the way he hated, but always kept him warm. I even tucked a chocolate chip cookie in my coat pocket for him, just in case he had a hard day. I remember tipping $2 at my usual cafe stop, the one where the radio always played too low to hear clearly. But that day, I caught the forecast. Light snow. Tonight in Kane County, temps dropping to 15 degrees. I should have taken it more seriously. Should have stayed home, but I didn't by 2:30. The sidewalks around Maple Falls Elementary were slick with black ice. I rushed anyway, worn boots, bad knee and all. The moment I hit the patch near the flagpole, I went down. A quick sting, then a deep burn in my leg. I gritted my teeth and pulled myself up before anyone could notice. My pants were torn at the knee, blood seeping through, but Ethan was waiting. He always expected me. He barely looked up when I called his name, just tossed his backpack at me, and walked ahead, like a little boss. I limped behind, the cold slicing through my coat, my scarf too loose. He didn't ask why I was walking slower than usual. At home, I barely had time to shut the door behind me before Matthew's voice cut through the living room like a whip. "You're 10 minutes late." He was standing outside like an orphan. I blinked. That's not okay, Mom," he snapped, tugging his AirPods out like I'd interrupted something sacred. "You have one job." Ethan dropped his shoes at the door and stomped off, yelling something about a dead iPad. Melissa emerged from the hallway, expression tight, not even glancing at my face. "Is dinner going to be ready soon?" I told Ethan. We'd eat early tonight. My leg pulsed beneath the wet fabric. I opened my mouth, then closed it. There was no point. I walked past them, silent, dripping melted snow, onto the hardwood floor. In the bathroom, I peeled off my pants and washed the wound. The gash was angry and red. The blood had dried in strange patterns, like branches. I dabbed on ointment and wrapped a clean bandage around it. The skin around it throbbed with each heartbeat. Upstairs, laughter echoed from Ethan's room. YouTube videos blaring. Downstairs, the hum of the TV filled the space with noise I couldn't decipher. I stood in the hallway a moment longer, listening, then changed into dry clothes and shuffled to the kitchen. No one had bothered to set the table. I boiled a small pot of soup, just enough for one. No one asked what I was cooking. No one asked why I didn't cook for all. I ladled my dinner into a chipped blue bowl and sat at the far end of the table alone. Spoon in one hand, cloth napkin in the other. Melissa sat on the couch, scrolling. Matthew tapped something on his laptop. AirPods back in. I wasn't sure if he was working or just pretending not to see me. The only warmth in the house came from the soup, that in the space heater, humming quietly by the sink. Then I heard it, soft but clear enough. She's becoming more of a burden every day, Matthew muttered. I didn't know if he meant for Melissa to hear it or not. Maybe he didn't even realize he said it aloud. She didn't respond, just nodded, vaguely, eyes still on her screen. I lowered my spoon, slowly, hands trembling. That word, burden, landed heavier than the fall I'd taken earlier. I finished eating, washed my bowl, and dried it with the towel that had faded sunflowers on it, the one Ethan used to like when he was 3. In the quiet that followed, I sat a long while in the kitchen, rubbing circles into the fabric of my pants. I ran my fingers over the bandage and whispered, I wasn't always this invisible. I made Ethan's favorite blueberry pancakes. He asked if we had Pop-Tarts instead. I flipped the last pancake onto the plate, carefully dusting it with powdered sugar, the way he used to love when he was 5. He didn't even look up from the tablet when I placed it in front of him. Do we have any Pop-Tarts? He asked, eyes glued to the screen. I stood there for a second, spatula still in hand. You used to like my pancakes, he shrugged. Pop-Tarts are faster. Melissa breezed into the kitchen a few minutes later, hair curled, makeup fresh. She glanced at the plate and raised an eyebrow, still doing the whole made-from-scratch thing. You know, you can get pancake batter on Instacart now. Takes like half the time. Honestly, you still shop. Like it's 1985. She laughed a little, not unkindly, just distracted. Her phone buzzed, and she was already halfway to the living room before I could answer. I poured myself a cup of coffee, ignoring the ache in my knee. It hadn't stopped throbbing since Tuesday, but I stood. I've been standing through worse for years. The snow was falling softly outside, coating the yard in a gentle hush. The radio by the window crackled, then picked up Nat King Cole's voice, warm and velvety chestnuts roasting on an open fire. I used to hum along to that song when Carl was alive. He hated Christmas music, but he let me play it anyway. I finished my coffee and decided to head downstairs. Melissa had mentioned the holiday plates yesterday. They were somewhere in the basement. I was sure of it. Maybe digging around would warm me up a little. The air downstairs was colder, musty with the scent of cardboard and cedar. I passed old moving boxes, a yellowed baby swing, a cracked vase I kept meaning to glue. The holiday plates were tucked behind a stack of tins. I reached for them, and that's when I saw it. The corner of a tin box, pale green with faded pink roses. My heart paused. The recipe box. I hadn't opened it in years. The latch creaked as I lifted the lid. Dozens of index cards sat there, worn with time. My handwriting, my mother's even a few, in Carl's blocky script. My fingers brushed over the familiar titles: apple crumble, baked, mac and cheese, the strawberry jam cake. Ethan never liked, but I made every Christmas anyway. Then I found it. A yellowing note tucked behind a recipe for lemon bars. The ink was faint, but I didn't need to read it. I knew every word. "Thanks for keeping me alive, Carl." It was written after his first heart surgery, when I'd stayed up for weeks straight, cooking bland, boring meals for him, measuring his sodium, hiding the salt shaker, nagging him to take his meds. He called me a nag. Then, one night, he slipped that note into the recipe box. Said nothing, just let me find it. He never said those words out loud. I pressed the paper between my hands. It was soft, from age, almost fragile, like something sacred. I sat down on the basement step, the tin in my lap, and wept quietly. The kind of crying that doesn't shake your shoulders or echo through a house, just salt and memory later. I carried the tin upstairs and stepped out onto the porch. The snow had slowed, leaving a fresh, white sheet over Maple Falls. I sat on the bench box, still in my lap, and let the cold numb my hands. Morning, Helen, a voice called. Nancy stood at the edge of her walk, clutching a mason jar, wrapped in a dish towel. "Thought you might want some peach preserves," she said. "Made them last week." I wiped my face quickly and smiled. "That's sweet of you." She stepped up, eyeing the box on my lap. "That, your old recipe box." I nodded. "Just feeling the cold today." I lied. Nancy didn't push. She just sat beside me for a minute. Jar warm between us. The door creaked open behind me. "Helen," Melissa called, "can you pick Ethan up early on Monday? I've got a nail appointment at 4. I didn't turn, just nodded barely. After a moment, I opened the lid again and found the note. I folded it slowly, deliberately, and whispered. Even Carl noticed once. They never do. Nancy stood, pulling her scarf tighter. She took a few steps, then turned back. "You know, you can talk to me anytime." It wasn't the shirt. It was the way he yelled, like I was nobody. The house buzzed with noise. That morning, pots, clattering drawers, slamming Ethan's screeching cartoons, still playing upstairs. Even though he was supposed to be getting dressed, the sky outside was pale and cold, the kind of white-blue that always made my joints ache. The annual tree lighting ceremony was at 4. Ethan's class was singing Jingle Bell Rock. He was excited, or had been, until the moment I made a mistake. I had forgotten to iron his choir shirt. It had always been ready before, folded, hung, pressed to perfection. But this morning, somewhere between the cinnamon rolls and Melissa's non-fat latte request, it slipped my mind. "Just one small thing," Matthew's voice exploded from the hallway. "Where's the damn shirt?" I flinched. My hands were wrist-deep in a bowl of batter. It's in the laundry room." "I meant to. You meant to." His footsteps pounded toward me, fast and sharp. "Jesus, Mom. You meant to." He held the wrinkled white shirt in one hand, waving it like a flag of war. Ethan stood behind him, pouting, arms crossed. "You ruin everything," Ethan said, not yelling, just flat. I froze. Melissa appeared next, arms folded neatly. "You said you had it." "Helen, I couldn't look at any of them." I walked into the kitchen. My hands were shaking. I turned off the oven. The cinnamon rolls, half-baked. The smell of them, sweet, unfinished, only made me feel more sick. Matthew kept muttering as he left the room. Unbelievable. I leaned against the counter, pressing both palms flat to the cool tile. From across the street, Nancy stood on her porch, pretending to water a plant that had long since frozen. I saw her phone in her other hand. She wasn't trying to hide it. I didn't know whether to feel embarrassed or grateful. I stayed in the kitchen until the shouting faded into doors slamming and Melissa's heels clicking down the hall. The house felt colder than it should have. The heating was fine, but something in the walls, something between us was broken after they left. I climbed the stairs and walked slowly to my room. I opened the closet and pulled down my old Navy suitcase, the one I used when Carl and I drove to the Smoky Mountains in '92. The zipper still stuck on one corner. I packed 2 changes of clothes and a worn photo of Carl and me taken at a 4th of July picnic decades ago. His smile was crooked. My hair was too big. We looked like strangers now. I stood in the hallway and looked around at the family photos that didn't include me, the wall hooks never used for my coat, the silence that had always followed my footsteps. Then I spoke. You want so much from me, but never once asked how I was doing. My voice didn't tremble. It was low, calm, like I was stating a fact. That afternoon, I stood at the back of the park, watching Ethan sing. He missed a few words in the second verse, fidgeted with his sleeves. I saw it, but I didn't comment. I clutched the suitcase, handle tighter. When I returned home, the porch light was on. I climbed the steps slowly, legs sore. The suitcase thumped softly behind me. Then came the knock. Nancy stood at the foot of the porch, wrapped in a thick brown coat, cheeks pink from the cold. She looked up at me, her eyes steady. You don't have to do this alone. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I left a letter, then quietly froze their future. The sun hadn't fully risen when I slipped out of bed. The house was still steeped in that fragile silence, only found before dawn. I moved slowly, careful not to wake anyone. Even the floorboards seemed to cooperate, for once creaking softly beneath my slippers, as if urging me forward. In the kitchen, I lit the small lamp above the sink. The glow barely reached the table. I sat down, folded my hands for a moment, then opened the drawer where I kept stationery that hadn't seen light in years. I didn't list grievances. I didn't vent. I just wrote questions. Did you ever see me? Did it ever matter when I smiled or cried or bled? Did you know I used to dance in the kitchen when no one was home? I didn't sign love, mom. I just signed mom. Upstairs, I could hear the faint hum of Matthew's sound machine. Ocean waves crashing over my worn-out nerves. Melissa's perfume bottle clinked against the vanity. Their world, still moving, without pause, unaware. By 7:15, I had showered, dressed, and pulled on my old wool coat. Outside, frost webbed the windshield of Nancy's Subaru, already warming in the driveway. She'd said she'd be here before sunrise. She was. Before I left, I took a final look around the kitchen. The fridge still dotted with Ethan's spelling tests. The coffee pot already prepared the night before. My doing as always, I folded the letter in thirds, placed it in the center of the table, and weighed it down with a coaster that read, "Home is where your story begins." Then I picked up my recipe box and slipped it into my bag. It felt heavier than usual. Nancy handed me a travel mug as I climbed into the passenger seat. "Cinnamon tea," she said. "Thought you might want something warm." I managed a quiet thank you. The mug warmed my palms, but not yet my chest, at the bank. Mr. Howard greeted me with a kindness I hadn't felt in a long time. "Mrs. Langley," he said, peering at me over his readers. "You always handled everything. For Carl, didn't you?" I nodded. Yes. He never liked paperwork. He smiled. The kind you give someone when you remember more than you're saying. I remember. It didn't take long. I explained that I wanted to freeze the joint account. Carl had left me, the one I discovered Matthew had been dipping into the past year. Mr. Howard didn't ask questions, just handed me a pen and a clipboard. When we walked out, the frost had melted from the sidewalks, but I still felt cold. We drove in silence. At a red light, Nancy asked, "You okay?" I nodded. It was all I could give. In my lap, I clutched the recipe box, like it was a life preserver, I whispered. I hope they read it. But it's not for them, it's for me. Meanwhile, back in the house, the sun was fully up. Matthew burst through the door, coat still on, muttering about needing breakfast before his meeting. He called out once, twice, then louder, "Mom!" No answer. Melissa entered the kitchen, holding her phone. "She's probably folding laundry or something." She stopped. The letter lay untouched on the table. Before she could read it, the phone rang. Matthew grabbed it. His face twisted as he listened. "Wait, what? The account's frozen." His voice dropped. "She froze it." Melissa finally looked at the letter. She read the first line, then the second. Her fingers trembled. She looked up. "She's gone." She actually left. The house was smaller. The heater rattled, but the silence was finally kind. It took a week for my ears to adjust. I didn't realize how loud my old life had been until I woke up in this cottage. No Ethan shouting for cereal. No Matthew pacing during phone calls. No Melissa asking if I'd picked up the wrong brand again. Just the soft tick of a wall clock and the occasional chirp of birds that hadn't flown south yet. Nancy's late sister had left the place almost untouched. A floral quilt on the bed, yellowed curtains that glowed in morning sun. The heater clanked like it was coughing through its final years. But it worked. That was enough. We spent the first few days scrubbing down the kitchen. Nancy sang along to the radio. Old Carpenters. Sometimes Simon and Garfunkel. She said baking would warm the place up. I didn't tell her I'd already planned to. I used to bake to fill time. Now I baked because it brought me back to life. Cinnamon rolls first, then an apple pie with a crust that flaked like memory. The smell drifted out the cracked window. A dog barked down the lane. Nancy peeked in and grinned, cheeks smudged with flour. "You've still got it," she said. By Saturday, we had a folding table and a slot at the weekend farmers market, nestled between a booth selling hand-knitted scarves and another ladling out butternut squash soup. I was nervous. My hands trembled slightly as I laid out the baskets, but the first customer smiled, then came back the next week with friends. One of them was Mr. Hank. He walked with a cane, wore a brown bomber jacket, and a cap that said, "Ooh, veteran." His eyes were clear blue, sharp, with memory. After his first bite of cinnamon roll, he looked at me, tilted his head, and said, "This tastes like 1947. I smiled, not sure if it was a compliment. He came every Saturday after that, always bought 2 rolls, said one was for the road, the other was for his wife, who passed in 2008. "I eat hers, for her now," he said. "She used to make pies, too, but never had the nerve to sell them." I didn't say much in return, just wrapped the rolls carefully and handed them over with a nod. Nancy handled most of the logistics, taking orders on an old tablet she'd unearthed from a drawer. I called it a magic slate, this touchscreen thing. "It's witchcraft," I said, tapping it cautiously. Nancy nearly dropped her coffee, laughing. We kept our rhythm. Mornings were for baking, afternoons for walking. The trail behind the cottage. Maple trees stood bare, but noble, like silent guards. In the evenings, we sat by the window with tea, sometimes saying nothing at all. One evening, I checked the tablet and noticed I had a new voicemail. I expected it to be from the market coordinator, but it was Ethan. His voice was soft, scratchy. "Grandma, I miss you. Mommy says you're busy." I told her, "Your pancakes are better than Pop-Tarts. I don't care if they're burnt. I hope you come home." I didn't cry, but my chest felt like it had been knocked from the inside. Later that night, as Nancy dried the last dish, she said, almost offhandedly, "My son hasn't called in 3 years. Guess we raised them too well, huh?" We both laughed, but the sound faded too quickly. In the quiet, I whispered to myself, I used to make pancakes no one wanted. Now, strangers line up for my bread. Nancy walked in from the other room, with something folded in her hand. She sat down, unfolded it, and slid it across the table. "There's a spring fair next month," she said, tapping the flyer. "You ready to go public?" He knocked, like it was still his house. But this time, I didn't answer right away. I stood at the kitchen counter, tying the last ribbon around a breadbasket. Outside the cottage window, spring flags fluttered above booths, and the faint sound of church bells drifted through the morning air. The heater had stopped rattling days ago. Or maybe I'd stopped noticing 3 months ago. I left with 2 changes of clothes. Today, I wore my favorite blouse, the floral one with sleeves that fluttered just a bit in the breeze. I used to save it for Sundays, for when Carl still cared what I wore. He said it was too cheerful. I wore it anyway. Nancy peeked in from the porch, balancing a tray of cinnamon rolls. "You ready?" she asked. Before I could answer, the knock came again, louder this time, familiar. I walked slowly to the door. My hand rested on the knob. I took a breath, then opened it. Matthew stood there, hair unkempt, tie askew, Melissa behind him, pale and tired looking, holding Ethan's hand. Or maybe he was holding hers. His eyes flicked up at me, then down again. "Hi, Mom," Matthew said. We didn't know where else to go. I waited. He shifted. "Ethan, he talks about you all the time. Keeps asking if you'll make pancakes again." Ethan peeked around Melissa's legs. I said, "Sorry." He mumbled, eyes shiny. Melissa said nothing. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The sun felt warm on my back. "I loved you all," I said slowly. "I still do, but I won't live unloved anymore." No one spoke. Melissa looked away. Matthew nodded more to himself than to me. They turned. Ethan paused, gave a little wave, then climbed into the back seat. I didn't cry. Inside the kitchen smelled like nutmeg and lemon glaze. Nancy placed a slip of paper on the shelf. It was the transcript of the audio clip she'd saved, framed now in simple wood. "Our freedom started there," she said softly. I nodded. "At the fair. People lined up early. Kids ran with cotton candy. Someone played folk guitar near the fountain. We sold out of cinnamon rolls by 10. Just before noon, a woman with streaks of silver in her hair approached the booth. She held a loaf of honey wheat like it was something sacred. "I watched your video," she said. "The one where you spoke at the community center last month. Your strength helped me leave too." I didn't know what to say, so I just placed my hand over hers for a moment. That was enough. Later, as I packed up the baskets, I caught sight of Matthew's car pulling away in the distance. Ethan was in the back seat, his small face pressed to the window. He waved. I waved back. Then I turned to Nancy, who was tucking the last cash envelope into her purse. "Let's bake something new tomorrow," I said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg to be seen. She simply walked away. And for the first time in years, every step felt like hers. Some people spend a lifetime giving thinking. It's the same as being loved. But when love forgets to say thank you, even the warmest heart begins to freeze, like an old quilt once wrapped around a family's winter. She was set aside when spring came, until she remembered her own warmth. So, if this story has touched something quiet in you, maybe it's time to check who you've stopped hearing or who's stopped hearing you.